My name is Father John Griesbach, and I'm the lucky padre that gets to live and work here at St. Anthony Retreat Center and Santa Teresita Youth Conference Center. And I thought today we would take a tour of our chapel here at the youth center, St. Junipero Serra Chapel. And so as I walk this way, you can see from the beautiful grounds that it is the crown jewel of the buildings that we have here for our youth center. And it was built 5 years ago now. It's hard to believe that it's been that long. And it has continued to serve in our diocese thousands and thousands of young kids. This is a bronze statue of Junipero Serra. It was made in Italy. This has been personalized a little bit to match our chapel here. Junipero Serra was a founding father of America and working on the west coast of what would become the United States. Junipero Serra was a Franciscan priest who was asked if they would build missions along the California coast. San Diego del Alcala was the first of the missions that he established. Then he got on a ship and went up to Monterey and established a mission in a place called Carmel in California. And that became his headquarters. And from there he would establish 9 of the 21 missions that we currently have along the California coast. But he was definitely a founding father and a person who we owe a great deal of thanks to for bringing Christian faith and our own traditions to bear here in our California. One thing I'd like you to see on this statue is that he's holding a mission. And when the statue was being made in Italy, we asked if they would be able to put the facade of our chapel onto the statue. So we sent them our plans and it came back with St. Junipero Serra Chapel in his arms. So he's actually holding the mission that we have here. Also in the base of this is a time capsule to be opened 50 years from now, actually 45 years now. Can you imagine what the world's going to be like 50 years from now? Well, they're going to get a special glimpse when they open up that time capsule of what it was like for us living here at this particular moment in time in history. I'd like to call your attention to this image of St. Teresa of Lisieux. Every year in Exeter, they have a scarecrow contest. And this year we put out the patron of our diocese, St. Teresa of Lisieux, as our entry. And if you'll notice on there, it says that we won first place. And so we all got a little blessing and a little good public relations for our place. It's at nighttime when we come out of the chapel. If we're not thinking about it, we can get a real shock when we see her standing here. I'm not sure what we're going to do next year, but we'll see what comes up. Come on inside now and let's see the chapel. The first thing I'd like to point out is a plaque that we have here. Bob and Mary Hahn, who in incredible generosity donated the entire amount of money in order to build this chapel. They came to us at one moment in time and said, we'd like to do something for the church. And they said what they were going to do, and we about fell off our chairs when they told us what they had planned. In the last month, Bob has passed away. And so we're remembering him and remembering Mary in a special way, and hoping that all the prayers that we're able to offer on their behalf find favor with the Lord, because there's going to be a whole lot of folks filling this chapel who will remember them with love and in their prayers. Next to that is a plaque commemorating the bishop who agreed to build our youth center. This was Bishop John Steinbach. He was the bishop at the time when plans came up for us to be able to purchase the retreat center. And then he had dreams of building a youth center. And so we're fortunate that because of his dreams and his openness, we're able to have a place for our young people. There used to be a retreat center on the shores of Bass Lake. And for many, many years, it served the young people of our diocese. As a matter of fact, when my mother was a teenager, she was a counselor at Camp Santa Teresita at Bass Lake. In fact, she broke her arm sliding into first base at that time. But because of circumstances, that camp was discontinued in the 1960s, late 60s and early 70s. And so really we went for about 40 years with no special site for our young people until, with the help of Bishop Steinbach and with the help and the generosity of all the people of the Diocese of Fresno, we were able once again to establish a place uniquely for young people. And we named it Santa Teresita Youth Conference Center after the original Camp Santa Teresita on the shores of Bass Lake. And of course you see next to Bishop Steinbach's plaque pictures of 2 bishops, Bishop Ochoa, who inherited the retreat center when he became the bishop of the Diocese of Fresno, and most recently Bishop Joe Brennan. Joe is very supportive of our community here, and we are so grateful for the love and the support that he continues to show for the care for our young people. Over here on the wall next to us is an image by a famous artist by the name of John Swanson. It's one of the originals that he did. It's called The Procession. It's a priceless piece of work, actually. It was donated by a couple here in town who had the opportunity to purchase it at one point in time when they lived in Los Angeles. And when they saw the chapel up here, they say, well, you know, the perfect place for it. And so they donated that to us. It's interesting that Cardinal Mahoney, when he was down there, wanted to buy this and suggested that they would be willing to sell it to him. They weren't. But that loss was our gain, and so we're so grateful to Anne and Jim Kingcore for this marvelous gift. Why don't we take a further walk now and go into the main body of the church. So as we enter the main body of the church, the first thing that we notice is that we have converted it into a studio in order to do virtual confirmation retreats for the diocese and for the various parishes and the young people of our diocese. We haven't been able to have anybody here in person because of COVID for the last 12 months. That hasn't stopped us from being able to reach out and to be able to serve our young people. And so every weekend that we have right now, we are putting on a virtual retreat for different parishes. And so far we're seeing that that is a very effective way in use for our talents, and it's seemingly well received by our parishes and by our young people. As we walk up to the front of the altar, I just call your attention to two statues that we have. One, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the other, St. Francis. Particularly St. Francis is an important person, not only for St. Anthony Retreat Center, but also for Santa Teresita Youth Conference Center. As you know, St. Francis's spirituality was remarkably incarnational. In other words, he understood that all of creation carries the DNA of God's love, so that everything we see is a reflection in some unique and powerful way and some encounter with the Lord. And so he was a man who could recognize God's presence in all of nature. And all the Franciscan places that you can go to will go out of their way to be able to incorporate the beauty and the wonder of nature in their various structures and buildings. And this is no different. If you notice, we don't have stained glass windows. We have windows open to the beauty of nature. And that was purposeful, including the window behind the altar, opening up to the beauties. And right now, with all the flowers blooming in springtime, it really is a stunning thing. Not only that, but when you're celebrating the Eucharist in a place like this, I can always tell when a deer or a bear walks by, because all the kids, their attention shifts, and they're all looking there and seeing what it is. So that's a marvelous experience to see them in the church here and being able to incorporate the beauties and the wonders of nature as part of our spirituality. After all, St. Francis said there are 3 big books that reveal God's presence. Jesus is the first, the Scriptures is next, but the most fundamental one is nature. We're always got that book open whenever you're here at the Youth Center. As we come forward here a little bit, I'd like to point out our altar furniture. This is special in the sense that this is all made out of Giant Sequoia Redwood. It was a gift to us from St. Anne's Chapel and St. Anne's Parish in Porterville. The Tule Indians had milled a number of redwood trees that had fallen down, and they had donated some of that to the parish. And they in turn donated it to us so that we could use it to build our altar and our bookstand and our tabernacle. And so I'd like to have you come and check this out on the altar here. This is something that makes our altar absolutely unique in the world. If you look here, you see very tiny rings. I don't know if you can even see it with this, but trust me, these are all rings that have to do with the life of this tree. And the tree that we have used to do this altar, we assume was about 2,000 years old. And what that means is every one of these rings corresponds with a year in the unfolding story of Christianity. And so every time we celebrate the Eucharist on this altar, we're celebrating the entire tradition and unfolding of God's plan of salvation that led not just to the person of Jesus and to the Gospels, but now to the unfolding of the Gospels across time and space. And as we live our lives at this particular moment in time in history, realize that the gospel continues to unfold and to develop in our own time and place. And we're part of that. It would be marvelous if we could be a fly on the wall someday and come back 100 years later and see how the Holy Spirit has continued to unfold the message of the gospel in the world in which we live. So this is every time we celebrate the Eucharist, we're always conscious and aware of the entire story and tradition of our Catholic faith. Because of the sap line on one of those redwood slabs, we were able to build a tabernacle with a tau cross, which is the classic Franciscan cross. And that was, I thought, a very clever use of the wood from the guy who built it for us. If you look from here to the back of the church, image of the Holy Spirit in the rose window at the top. That is a facsimile of a similar one, only about 10 times its size, that appears at St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. And so it was chosen because primarily we do retreats for our young people who are preparing for confirmation. And so we wanted to have a symbol of confirmation, and we thought that was a beautiful one to add. Now I'd like to call your attention to something really special as well. Like all chapels, we have the Stations of the Cross, but the Stations of the Cross that we have are unique in a lot of ways. First of all, they are not the traditional Stations of the Cross. In 1991, on a cold Friday afternoon of Holy Week, Good Friday, Pope John Paul II came down from the Vatican and went to the Colosseum to begin the traditional praying of the Stations of the Cross. And there were pilgrims from all over the world at that moment. It was a very cold day. It was people huddling together, regardless of language or background, just to keep warm. I happened to be there that day, and it turned out to be the one day that Pope John Paul II introduced a whole new experience for the Stations of the Cross called the Scriptural Stations of the Cross. These all have scriptural references from the Gospel, and so they really lend themselves in a wonderful way to meditations. Initially, these are actually copies of the original ones, which are at Holy Cross Church in Porterville. Monsignor Scott Doherty had these built. They're called written icons, and of course, these are all of an art form that we're not all that familiar with in the Western world, but it really matches up very well with Eastern Orthodox Church. And each one of them is remarkable for the faith that they contain and the beauty and the wonder, and also because of the symbolism. Like all icons, they're meant to be like the icon on your computer. You know, you push on the icon and it opens up all kinds of documents and doors that were there behind it. The same is true with this. As you meditate on each of the elements in these things, it's like pushing on an icon and it opens the door to a deeper spiritual awareness. And you can keep going and going in that and never come to an end, which is part of the wonder of this particular form of art. We have a number of Stations of the Cross that are different from the traditional ones. Like if you take a look at station number 2 here, we have the betrayal and arrest, Judas giving Jesus a kiss. You'll notice he's got a scroll in his hand. Judas is trying to identify Jesus and who he is by a kiss. That scroll is the scroll from the prophet Isaiah that Jesus read that truly identified him in the synagogue at Nazareth when he first began, when he announced that he was going to be a representative of God to bring about the kingdom of God. And so there are nuances in all of these Stations of the Cross that really bring them out for us and become a real rich opportunity for prayer. We have all of them around the church. This is Jesus encounters the women of Jerusalem. Through this valley of tears I am with you. Jesus speaks to the women of Jerusalem around about the circumstances that would be part of their heritage, that would bring them grief and sadness and difficulty. In this particular station, the artist has chosen women across time and culture, background, race, heroes of our church, all of whom have had a real difficult time and have been willing to deal with suffering for the sake of the gospel. Foreground is Saint Tekakwitha, Mohawk Indian maiden who was canonized a saint in our tradition as well, especially for our ancestors who are here and from the missions and for here in our valley, our Native American people. It's a tribute to them and to their faith that's managed to hang on through lots of difficulty and tribulation as well. We end up actually not with 14, but with 15. The 15th station is the resurrection. And Pope John Paul II incorporated that as part of the whole story of the Paschal Mystery. Because if in fact every Good Friday, it ends with Easter Sunday, so we want, when we make the Stations of the Cross and consider our own journeys of life, that we would recognize that our Good Fridays as well will ultimately not be the last word, but will end in Easter Sunday and new and more abundant life. Along with the Stations of the Cross that we have in the chapel, I'd like to tell you that as we move toward this Easter, we're going to be doing something special. We're going to be featuring each one of these Stations of the Cross on the way leading up to Easter Sunday, starting on the 21st of March, a Sunday. We'll start with the first station, and each day we will have a brief reflection and opportunity to pray on each of these stations for the next 14 days. And the last station that we'll be praying over will be the station of the resurrection that we will have at the end of our Easter journey. So on Easter Sunday, we'll bring that to an end. But we hope that you'll be able to tune in with us to see what those meditations will be like each day and the stories that accompany them. And hopefully it'll be a fruitful experience for you on your journey at the end of this Lent. So that kind of wraps up our tour for the day of St. Junipero Serra Chapel. We're so glad that you tuned in today and that you went with us on this tour, but I'd like to invite you soon to come and see it for yourself. We can do a virtual tour, but there's nothing like seeing it in person and having an opportunity to meet you and talk with you and see ways that we can support you and your young people here at Santa Teresita Youth Conference Center and here at Junipero Serra Chapel. Thanks for joining us.